Hello everybody and welcome to the My Key Counter pre-recorded training. My name is Tyler and today I will be your host and trainer. Like I said, this is a pre-recorded training, so there's no app involvement. You're not going to be taking any tests. You're not going to be getting your AKS cert either, for that matter. So this is just sort of either as a refresher for anyone who has been trained, or just sort of as a preview of what to expect from the full training for anybody who doesn't have time to sign up for it yet, but wants to get some sense of what to expect from the full training. So we're going to cover all the same information, but like I said, there's no exam questions. We're not going to dive deep into some of the specific topics that we might with some of those exam questions. Still going to get all the same great information, but of course, make sure if you haven't done so once at least yet, you sign up for the actual live training whenever you get a chance. So with that being said, let's talk about how this training is going to work, and then let's dive into it. So we're going to begin by talking about the different types of keys and remotes and how they work. After that, we're going to talk about how to identify the correct key or remote on the My Key Counter website using what we call the rule of 3. And then after that, we'll move on to the hardware, where I'll show you how to use the SmartBox programmer, as well as how to cut a high security key using a high security key cutter. So with all that said, let's jump into our first topic, which is, as promised, understanding the technology, beginning with the different types of keys and remotes.
Let's begin with transponder keys. And there are two styles of these: standard transponder keys and high security transponder keys. The standard transponder keys have standard side cut blades, just like you're used to. High security transponder key blades are cut on the face of the key, however, so they may be a little different than what you're used to. As you can see here, there are a few different styles of high security keys, but they all work more or less the same. Next, let's talk about remotes, or what many people call fobs. These remotes come in a variety of shapes and styles, depending on the vehicle they belong to, but they all serve the same basic purpose: controlling the vehicle accessories. And the main differences will be in the different button configurations on each remote. Now we'll cover combination remotes, which are exactly what they sound like: combination key and remote, which means they're going to start the engine and control the remote functions. The first type of combination remote is the remote head key, which is just a key with a remote head attached. The next type is the flip key, which is a remote that has a key blade that will flip out with the press of a button and fold away back into the remote. And these are often referred to as switchblade keys. And then you have the fobic. These also start the engine just like the other two keys, but instead of a metal key blade, it has a plastic ignition tip to do the job. And finally, let's talk about proximity remotes, or prox remotes. These are found on push-to-start vehicles and allow you to start the engine without even taking the remote out of your pocket. And since we're talking about prox remotes, let's talk about insert keys while we're at it. Every prox remote and every fobic will have an insert key, which is a metal key blade that slides into the remote for emergency situations, such as a dead remote battery. It's important to know about these keys so that you get them cut for your customer before they leave the store in case they ever need it. And that about wraps it up for the different types of keys and remotes.
Okay, so there you have it, the different types of keys and remotes. And now that we know the different types of keys and remotes, we can learn a bit more about how they work. These devices have two primary components that will be communicating with the vehicle. That means there's going to be two components that we're responsible for programming when it comes to programming these keys or remotes using the SmartBox. So we're going to find out what those components are and what they do while we take a peek inside of these remotes.
All keys or remotes will come with one or both of the following: a transponder chip, which is the part of the key that communicates with the vehicle's security system so that you can start the engine, and a remote control board, which is the part that controls all of the remote button functions, such as lock, unlock, panic, etc. Combination remotes, such as proximity remotes and remote head keys, will have both. And it's these main components that the SmartBox is going to program. As you can see with this remote head key, the chip is separate from the button control module, which means it will have to be programmed with a separate programming procedure. This is very common on remote head keys. Proximity remotes, on the other hand, typically include the chip with the remote control board so that both of them program with a single programming procedure. Since it's impossible to know if the transponder chip and remote will program together or separately just based on the type of remote you're using, we made sure to provide that information on all applicable products so that you're informed before you attempt programming. We don't expect you to be product experts, but now when it comes to programming using the SmartBox, you know exactly what you're programming.
All right, so there you have it. The transponder chip, or chip as we usually call it, which allows you to start the engine, and the remote control board, which of course controls the button functions on the remote. So now that we know the different types of keys and remotes and how they work, we can head over to the My Key Counter website. And our website should feel pretty familiar to you if you've done any online shopping in the past, but there's a couple of things that make our website unique, and I want to make sure to point those out for you before we move forward. So let's take a look at what those are while we navigate the My Key Counter website.
To begin looking up a product on the My Key Counter website, it starts with the make, model, and year, and you can input that information using the drop-down menus here on the main page. For this example, let's use a Toyota Camry 2014. After selecting the year, a pop-up is going to ask you some basic questions about the vehicle and the product you're looking for to help narrow down your results. The first question asks, is your vehicle a push-to-start vehicle? For this example, we're going to choose no. The next question is, what is the number of buttons on your remote? And here we see the number of button options available or transponder key only. We want something with a remote, so we're going to choose the number that matches the number of buttons on our customer's remote. In this case, there's only one option, so we'll choose the 4-button option. Different vehicles may have different questions, but once you answer all of them, you'll be taken to the results screen and shown only the products that match based on the answers you gave to those questions. If you scroll down a bit on the page, you'll see another section that says related to your search. And in this section, you can find cheaper alternatives to the main items above, such as basic transponder keys, insert keys, or case and pad replacement kits. Those questions did a great job of filtering the results, but we still need a way to know for sure which key or remote is the correct key or remote for the customer's vehicle. This is accomplished using what's called the Rule of 3, and you can see the steps of the Rule of 3 in this banner on the left side of the screen. By following these 3 simple steps, you'll be able to identify the correct key or remote with confidence every time.
All right, so there's the My Key Counter website. You'll answer some questions, you'll get your results. Don't forget that there is that related to your search category on the results screen, so you may want to scroll down there and see if there's maybe a cheaper option for one of your customers, depending on what kind of situation they're in or what kind of budget they have. And then, of course, there's the Rule of 3 for identifying the right key or remote, and that's what we're going to get into next. The Rule of 3 is a 3-step process, as the name would suggest, and its job is to take you one step at a time, carefully narrowing down your search until at the end of those 3 steps, you know exactly which product is correct for your customer's vehicle, and you'll have all the information you need to program it successfully. So to explain the Rule of 3, we're also going to take it one step at a time, starting with the first step, the FCC ID.
The first step in the Rule of 3 is the FCC ID. This just means finding and verifying the FCC ID on your customer's remote. FCC stands for Federal Communications Commission, and any remote that's broadcasting a wireless signal is required to have one of these IDs. You can find the FCC ID on most remotes, either on the back or the inside of the remote, and that could be inside on the plastic shell or on the circuit board itself. However, there are some additional locations for certain types of remotes. For example, flip keys have a third location you can find the FCC ID, and that's under the resting area of the key. And in fact, this is the most common location for an FCC ID on these types of remotes. Proximity remotes also have a third location, and that's under the insert key. This could mean on the bottom edge of the remote or maybe on the back side. Either way, you'll have to remove the key to find it. Fobics are also a little different. You can still find the FCC ID on the backside, but you can't find it on the inside. So the good news is that you'll never have to open these up to check. However, if you can't find it on the backside, there is still a second location, and that's on the end of the ignition tip itself. Since some of these FCC IDs can be worn down, dirty, or otherwise hard to read, Don't be afraid to use a magnifying glass, a flashlight, or even your camera phone to better help with some of these hard-to-read FCC IDs. And then once you find it, you'll be able to match that FCC ID to one or more than one remote on the results screen of the MyKeyCounter website. Anything that doesn't have a matching FCC ID can be safely ignored. And that concludes the first step in the rule of 3, the FCC ID.
All right, there's the FCC ID. You can find it on the back or inside of most remotes, but remember, a couple of those have additional locations, such as under the resting area of the key or under the insert key. And then when you find the FCC ID, you'll match it to one or more than one remote on the website, and you'll be able to ignore the ones that don't match, but now you need to narrow it down between the ones that do. And that is where the product details come in. By clicking into the product details, you can find all the information you need for that product, but when it comes to the rule of 3, there's actually just a few things that we're concerned with. So naturally, I'm going to tell you what those few things are while we cover step 2 in the rule of 3, the details.
The second step in the rule of 3 is the details. By clicking on the product image or the Click for Details button, we'll be taken to the product details page. There's a lot of information on this page, but there's actually only 3 things that we need to verify as part of the details step of the rule of 3, and that's the buttons, the chip, and the notes. Or that is to say, the button options, the chip type, and any additional notes. The first thing to verify is the buttons, or button options. And you can see here that this has L, U, T, and P, and each of those letters corresponds to a button function. If you hover your mouse over the little I to the left, you'll see what each letter stands for. And in this case, we see that the vehicle has lock, unlock, trunk, and panic. Pictures can be useful, but we don't want to rely on them, as looks can be deceiving, so make sure that you're actually verifying your customer's button configuration with the button options, not the picture itself. Once you've verified the button options, move on to the chip type. You can see the chip type here is a Texas ID 4D72G chip. Now, you don't need to worry too much about what all of that means. The important thing is making sure that it matches your customer's chip information. You'll be using the SmartBox to read the chip information off your customer's key, but we'll cover that in a separate topic. Now that we've verified the chip type, we can move on to the additional notes. And that just means reading and being aware of any additional notes that apply to this product. In this case, we see that there's a G stamp on the blade, which we would be able to verify on our customer's key. And it also reminds us, please chip read customer's original key to verify compatibility, especially for split year 2014, which simply means that this vehicle had multiple chip options for the 2014 model year. In this case, the note's only reminding you to do something that you've already done at this point, which is verifying the customer's chip. But other vehicles will have different notes, giving you different information and requirements, so make sure that you read them carefully. And there you have it, the button options, the chip type, and the additional notes. That concludes step 2 in the rule of 3, the details.
Okay, there's the detail step. The buttons, the chip, and the notes. So let's recap real quick. Buttons for button options. If there's buttons on your customer's remote, make sure they match the button options on the details page. Don't just assume they match because they have the same number of buttons or something like that. You'll want to make sure the button functions themselves actually match the letters you're seeing depicted there. And then if your customer's key turns in the ignition is going to have to read that chip and make sure that it's correct. So of course, we need to read the chip and make sure that it's correct as well. And then the notes. Anytime there's additional notes, they are always required reading. So buttons, chip, and notes, that makes up the detail step. And if you verified the details after verifying the FCC ID, you should have the correct product. But it's the rule of 3. And that third step in the rule of 3 is just as important as the first two. While the FCC ID and the details will get you to the right product, it's the third step, the SmartBox widget, that's going to tell you what to do with it. Now, yes, the SmartBox itself is going to walk you through the programming process one step at a time, does all the heavy lifting for you. But at the end of the day, every vehicle is a little bit different, and certain vehicles may come with additional or maybe just situational requirements that, of course, you need to be aware of before you attempt programming. So to talk about those notes and some other helpful information provided by it, we're going to cover the third and final step in the rule of 3, the widget.
The third step in the rule of 3 is the SmartBox widget, or simply the widget. You can access the widget by clicking on the SmartBox logo in the corner of the product image. The widget will pop up and it provides all kinds of important programming information. Starting from the top of the Information tab, we have our programming options, organized by category: transponder and phobic, proximity and remote, and pin code. Most of these letters and numbers are going to be pretty unfamiliar to most inexperienced SmartBox users, but that's okay. They're just here for reference, and typically you're going to skip right past them. Beneath the programming options are the programming notes, and this section will never be skipped over. These notes are absolutely critical in order to successfully program using the SmartBox, as they provide all of the necessary requirements depending on which type of situation you're in or what you're trying to accomplish. For example, one of the notes here says, if you are programming a remote head key for this vehicle, the remote will not program at the same time as the transponder. Remember when you learned earlier that sometimes remote head keys separate the transponder and remote control board. And it's here in the widget notes that it's going to tell you when you need to program them separately if that's the case. The amount of notes and the nature of those notes will vary from vehicle to vehicle, with many vehicles having very few notes and some having no notes at all. It all simply depends on the type of vehicle you're programming, but you will always have to read any notes if they appear to find out which ones apply to you and your situation. And once you've read through the notes, you'll see the programming complexity and average time to program, so you have a sense of how involved the programming process will be depending on which type of product you're programming. Now that wraps up the Information tab on the widget, but there's also some video tabs provided as well. That means that once you're done reading the widget notes, you can watch a video of the programming procedure you're about to accomplish for that vehicle, so you can approach that procedure with confidence, even if it's one you've never done before. These videos are usually only a couple of minutes long and really are a great supplement to the notes that you read on the Information tab. And that concludes the third and final step in the rule of 3, the widget.
Okay, so there's the widget. And now let's recap what the widget covers here. You're going to click on the widget, and at the very top, the first thing you're going to see are those programming options organized by product type, so you know which ones you're looking at. Again, you're probably going to skip over those most of the time, but they're there for reference in case you need them. And then beneath those, you have the programming notes. And again, you're never going to skip over those because they're there to tell you everything you need to know to program that vehicle successfully, or what you may need to know. It just depends. Remember, a longer notes section rarely, if ever, means a more complicated or time-consuming programming process. It just means there's more potential situations or scenarios you may need to be informed of. For example, let's say you're programming a Ford F-Series. That includes the F-150, the F-250, and the F-350. So depending on which one you're programming is going to dictate which notes in the widget actually apply to you. So you'll have to read through them all to find out what the notes are, but of course, only some of them are ever going to apply. So make sure you're reading them carefully and paying attention to that. And then if you did want to know how difficult or time-consuming the process was going to be, we have those conveniently color-coded little dials at the bottom telling you that exact information. And then if that wasn't enough, we also provide the video tabs so you can click on a video and actually watch the procedure before you ever even attempt it. It's extremely helpful, especially when you're trying to program a vehicle you haven't programmed before. Now nothing's going to catch you off guard because you've seen it done once before, or twice, or however many times you choose to watch the video. So the videos aren't a requirement, but clicking on the widget to read the widget notes is. That's part of the rule of 3. It's a requirement. So if you're already clicking on the widget, I highly recommend you watch those videos as well. So with that being said, now that we know the rule of 3, we know each step and why it's important, we need to put it all together. I've told you each step one at a time, but it's a complete process, so I'm going to put it together as a complete process and show you what it looks like. We're going to run through the FCC, the details, and the widget in real time, so you know exactly what to expect when you start following the rule of 3 for one of your customers. Let's take a look.
Let's practice the rule of 3. First, we'll put in the make, model, and year. And for this example, we'll use a Nissan Altima 2018. Again, we'll be asked a question from the pop-up, is this vehicle a push-to-start vehicle? Let's say yes for this example. Again, it asks how many buttons on the remote, and we said 4 last time, so let's pick 5. This next question is new. Does your vehicle have a factory-installed remote start? and it even provides an example image of what that button looks like. For this example, let's say yes. And finally, to the best of your knowledge, has there ever been any aftermarket remote start or aftermarket alarm system installed on this vehicle? Of course, you'll have to ask the customer, but in most cases, the answer will be no, so we'll choose no. Now on the results screen, let's start the rule of 3. Even though there's only one option, you still need to follow the rule of 3. The first step is the FCC ID, so as long as the customer's remote has a matching FCC ID to this product, we can move on to step 2 by clicking for details. Remember, on the details page, there's just 3 things to identify: the button options, the chip type, and the additional notes. The button options on this remote read L, U, T, P, and RS. RS is a new one from last time, but hovering over the little information icon, we see that RS stands for Remote Start. The next thing to check is the chip type, but you won't find the chip type on any proximity remote. That's because, as we learned earlier, the chip is combined with the remote control board in prox remotes, so as long as the FCC ID and the button options are correct, the chip will be correct as well. Now we can move on to the additional notes, and in this case, there are some notes to be aware of. For the sake of this example, the one we want to focus on is the one that says IC and continental number must match to ensure compatibility. You can see the IC and continental number listed just above that note, and that just means that you'll have to match those numbers in addition to the FCC ID. Now that the details have been verified, we can move on to the third step in the rule of 3 by clicking on the widget. There's only one note here, but it is important. All available working keys must be present at the time of programming. After entering programming mode, this vehicle will delete all keys, and all available keys will need to be reprogrammed at this time, or they will no longer start the engine. Don't worry, this note sounds a lot scarier than it is. It just means that if your customer does have any additional keys or remotes, they'll have to bring them in when it's time to program so that they can be reprogrammed along with the new key or new remote, because if not, they will no longer work. This is just an additional security function that some vehicles have to make sure that if there's any lost keys or remotes with a previous owner, that they no longer work now that the current owner is getting new keys or remotes made. And don't worry, reprogramming the existing keys or remotes by no means makes the programming process more complicated or time-consuming. And in case you weren't sure, remember that you can click over to the video tab to watch the procedure before you begin. And that wraps up the entire rule of 3, the FCC, the details, and the widget.
Okay, there's the rule of 3. FCC, details, and widget. Make sure you're following the complete rule of 3, and I do emphasize widget here because that's something you want to check every single time with your customers. As you just saw in the example, sometimes the widget is going to require certain things be addressed or accomplished prior to the programming process, which is something you and I'm sure your customer are going to want to know about before you get there. So if you do have to have your customer bring in all of their keys or remotes, that's something you'd want to tell them before scheduling a time for them to return for that new key or remote to be programmed. Right? You want them to be prepared. They want to be prepared. So make sure you're always reading the widget. Not every vehicle is going to have notes like that, but plenty of vehicles do have other similar types of notes that need to be addressed beforehand. So that's why it's important before you ever make a sale or place an order or anything like that, you follow the rule of 3 and read through the widget carefully before your customer goes on their way. That way, if there is anything to address, you can handle that and everything's going to work out smoothly when it comes time to program. So now that we know the rule of 3, we can move on to the hardware, and I'm going to show you how to use the smart box. But before we can use the smart box, we need to connect and power the smart box. And it's not a difficult process by any means, but it's one of those things where there's only one correct way to do it, and if you don't do it correctly, well, things aren't going to work correctly. So I'm going to show you the correct way to connect and power the smart box.
Before we can connect our smart box and our tablet, we have to apply power to the smart box. And you can do that using the included mini USB and wall adapter or the smart power adapter. You can also use the OBD cable, but that's for applying power at the vehicle, so we can worry about that later. For this example, we are going to use the smart power adapter. Once you've connected your smart box to power, the power LED will turn solid on and the tablet LED will flash, indicating it's ready to receive a tablet connection. To connect the tablet, unlock the screen and make sure that Bluetooth is on by swiping down from the top of the screen and clicking the Bluetooth icon so that it turns green. Next, you'll have to pick the device you want to pair to. Choose SMB followed by an 8-digit number, which should match the serial number on the bottom of your smart box. The number of options you see available will be dependent on the number of local Bluetooth devices. At this point, it will ask you for a PIN, and the PIN for every smart box is 0000. Once the two devices are paired, you can launch the SmartBox app, and you'll notice that the tablet light on the SmartBox turns solid on once they're connected. Now that the initial pairing process is complete, future connections will only require that the SmartBox is powered on and that your tablet has Bluetooth turned on when you launch your SmartBox app.
Okay, so there you have it. You're going to plug in power to the SmartBox, the power LED turns on, and the tablet light will be flashing, indicating you're ready for a tablet connection, at which point you'll be able to connect the tablet like I just showed you, and then use your SmartBox for all of its wonderful features. But before we get to those, there's one more thing I need to teach you, and that's how to update the SmartBox. Updates are super easy. It's like anything else you've ever updated. You press a couple buttons, and then it runs the update for you. But these updates are required on a regular basis, and of course, you will be the one or one of the ones responsible for initiating those updates. So it's important that you know how it's done. So let's take a look. This is how you keep the SmartBox up to date.
The SmartBox must be updated on a regular basis. The minimum requirement is once every 30 days, though we recommend doing it once a week. These updates can include support for new vehicles, new programming options for existing vehicles, or changes to existing programming options. To begin the update process, push the Updates button on the bottom middle of the main menu. If it's been more than 30 days since you last updated your SmartBox, when you log in, you'll automatically be redirected to this screen. Now that we're on the update screen, let's make sure the Wi-Fi is turned on the tablet. To do this, swipe down from the top of the screen and click the little Wi-Fi logo on the left side. It should turn green and within a few seconds connect to your Wi-Fi network. You'll see a little pop-up at the bottom of the screen when this happens. Now that you're connected to Wi-Fi, you can hit the Get Updates button and the SmartBox will automatically download and install any necessary updates. This process typically only takes a few minutes, but it can vary from update to update. You can monitor the progress of the update by watching the blue bar fill up across the screen. Once the updates are complete, click the Finish button and this will take you back to the login screen. This is a good time to turn the Wi-Fi back off so that it doesn't interfere with programming later. When you log back in, you'll see on the bottom right of the screen it says that the next update is required in 30 days. You can use this countdown in order to track and schedule your next update.
All right, so there you have it. Updating the SmartBox, it is required once a month. Well, once every 30 days. So if it's a 31-day month, you don't get an extra day out of it. That's not how it works. It's once every 30 days. But like I said in the video, I recommend updating once a week. We all operate on a weekly schedule, so it's an easy thing to keep track of. But also, if you wait more than 30 days to update the SmartBox, the next time you try and use it, it will force you to update it first. And depending on how many updates have gone out in that 30+ day period, depending on how fast or how slow your Wi-Fi might be, that update procedure might take more time than you or your customer are comfortable waiting on in that moment. So to avoid that situation entirely, do it once a week, because then not only are you never going to be at that 30+ day point, but if you ever do miss an update for some reason, someone forgets or can't make it into work, it's still going to be updated another 7 days later, so you're never going to fall outside of that window. It's just an easy way to keep on top of things, and that way you don't have to worry about it in the future. So 30 days is the requirement, but once a week is the recommendation. And now that we know how to connect and power the SmartBox and keep it up to date, we can put it to good use, beginning with chip reading. So I alluded to chip reading earlier. We talked about it on the details step in the rule of 3. When you get to the details, you'll have to read and verify the customer's chip. So the details page will tell you the chip type inside the product you're looking at, and the SmartBox here is going to tell you the chip type inside of your customer's key. It's not a difficult process. The hardest part about it is getting you to do it every time, because this does require that you have the SmartBox out and ready to go when following the rule of 3. It's not a difficult thing to do, obviously, but that's the part where people tend to skip over it. So don't do that. Just make sure your SmartBox is out, because when you get to the details step, you're going to have to read the chip, and the SmartBox is going to do it for you, and I'm going to show you how that works right now.
Chip reading is a critical part of key identification, but luckily, it's a pretty quick and simple process. To begin, click the Chip button in the top middle of the main menu. The next screen provides a couple of options, Chip Reader and Chip Clone. Make sure to select Chip Reader every single time, since chip cloning isn't supported by the MyKeyCounter program. That means it's not going to work with any of our keys. And we're here to chip read. On the next screen, there's a white text box that says, please put the key in the coil and do not move. The coil is this slot at the end of the smart box with a plus-shaped hole in the bottom. To chip read your customer's key, just drop the key in the coil and click the Read Chip button on the screen. The tablet now says please wait, and after a few seconds, you'll get your results. The information provided by chip reading can vary from one chip to the next, but every chip will provide the chip type on the very top line. And it's the chip type that we're looking for when we chip read. The chip type may be letters, numbers, or a combination of the two, and now that we know our customer's chip type, we can match it to the details page of the product we're looking at. Since this is the only way to identify the chip inside the key, make sure that you chip read every key every time.
Okay, so there's chip reading. You drop the key in, you press read chip, and then you're going to get some results. And what you're looking for is going to be on the top line of those results. It's the chip type. So it will say type followed by some letters or numbers, whatever the chip name is, and you'll take that information and it should match to the details page. Unless it doesn't, because it's not always going to match, right? That's why we chip read. So if it doesn't match, that's okay. You don't have to panic. Just head back to the results screen and continue following the rule of 3 until you find a key that does match. And there's only so many different keys made for a specific make, model, and year. So it's not like you're going to spend all afternoon trying to do the rule of 3 to find the right key. You're going to be picking between 2 or 3 keys at most. So it's not going to take you too much time. But do keep in mind, even if you can figure it out through process of elimination, or maybe like we saw earlier, there's only one result on the results screen in the first place, you still need to follow the rule of 3 for the key that you think is correct, just to verify that it is. It most likely will be, but you just never know what kind of condition the customer's original key or remote is in, or what kind of differences or variables to expect in some of those kind of rarer situations. And we can't prepare you for all of those. There's too many. So instead, we just put in a simple process, the rule of 3, part of which includes chip reading. And as long as you follow the rule of 3 and chip read every time, you're always going to verify every detail you need to. And if anything ever doesn't match up right, you're going to know about it before it's ever a problem. That way you can take care of it, and you and your customer can have a pleasant experience. So keep that in mind. Always, always, always chip read. There's a reason we expect it and ask for it. It's very, very important, even if it doesn't always seem that important. So just build good habits early and start chip reading from the first time you do the rule of 3. It's only going to save you time in the long run, I promise. All right, so now that we know how to chip read, I can teach you how to frequency test. And it's a lot like chip reading. It shows us something that we can't physically see, but unlike chip reading, there's 2 main differences. First of all, it's for remotes, it's not for keys. And second of all, it's not part of the rule of 3. So you're not going to frequency test every single time. It's more of a troubleshooting tool. So if you're having a problem programming in a new remote, or maybe your customer's original remote is giving you some issues, whatever the problem is, the solution is going to start with a frequency test. Because frequency testing is going to give you the information you need to figure out your next steps. So I'm going to show you how it works in the next video. Let's take a look.
Frequency testing is a great way to make sure the remote you're working with is functioning correctly. To begin, hit the frequency test button on the top right of the main menu. On the new screen, wait a few seconds until you see the MHZ for megahertz show up next to the zeros on screen. Once they do, you're ready to start testing. To frequency test a remote, just place the remote on the testing area indicated by the Wi-Fi logo on the face of the smart box. To test the remote, just press and briefly hold one of the buttons and notice the frequency that appears on screen. This frequency should match the frequency you see on the details page, plus or minus about 10%. Though frequency testing isn't part of the rule of 3, you'll still be referring to the details page to compare your results. You may need to test more than one button to get the results you need. A correct frequency on any button will tell you that the battery is good, but if the frequency is incorrect or 0, you may need to check multiple buttons and compare the results. If they're all incorrect, that tells you that the battery is probably the problem. But if only one button is incorrect, that tells you that your battery is still good and it's the button itself causing the issues. With this simple tool, we can quickly identify the problem and move forward with a solution.
Okay, and there's frequency testing. Pretty much as easy as chip reading, right? But just like chip reading, you want to make sure that you are comparing your results to the details page. There is more than one frequency out there. Some are a lot more common than others, but there is a variety, and there's no way to know for sure what the frequency is supposed to be just by looking at the remote. So make sure that when you frequency test, you're checking it against the details. Now, I did explain certain results as being pretty straightforward. If one button is 0, but the rest read good, you have a bad button. If all the buttons read 0, you probably have a bad battery. But don't assume that just because all the buttons read something above 0, that it's automatically the correct frequency. A low battery will put out a low frequency. And so if you're supposed to get, let's say, 315 megahertz, and you're getting 215 megahertz from a low battery, well, it's not 0, but it's also not 315, so it's going to cause problems. So in those situations, you want to make sure that you're not just going through the motions. You're not just looking for a number on the screen. You're actually comparing that number to the details page to make sure that it's accurate. So you're getting the information you're actually looking for. So keep that in mind. You're not going to frequency test that often, but when you do, you want to make sure you're doing it right. So with that being said, with all that being said, right, we know the different types of keys and remotes. We know how to find them on the MyKeyCounter website using the rule of 3, and now we know how to use the smart box to assist us in those efforts, which means we're ready to start programming. So this next video is going to show you how to program. And I did mention earlier, every vehicle is a little bit different, and that's true. So what you're about to see here is probably not going to be the programming procedure you end up doing next, and that's okay. Here's some good news. First of all, most programming procedures are just a handful of steps. I think they average around 5, something like that. So most of them aren't expecting you to do too much in the first place. Second piece of good news is oftentimes these programming steps are using the same or at least similar steps as you've done on other vehicles. There's a lot of universal steps like turning the ignition on and off, or holding the lock and unlock button down at the same time on the remote. You're going to see these pop up from time to time on different makes and models, so much so to the point that you'll start programming vehicles you've never programmed before, and they're already going to feel familiar to you because they're not asking you to do anything that you haven't already done before in some form or another. So what you're about to see here may be unique to this vehicle and vehicles like it, but in terms of what to expect from most programming procedures from the smart box, it's a great representation of what you're going to get into. And if you can handle what you're about to see here, and I promise you can, there's just about nothing this program is going to throw at you that you can't handle day one. And anything that you can handle day one, program a few more vehicles, and that's about all it's going to take to get you to the confidence and comfort level you need to handle anything this program has to throw at you. So let's take a look. This is programming a vehicle using the SmartBox Programmer.
Hey everybody! Today I'm going to show you how to program a 2016 Toyota Corolla using our SmartBox device. And in order to do that, all we have to do is plug this in to the OBD port down between the steering wheel and the pedals. After we've done that, we can launch our app and log in using our PIN code. From this next screen, the main menu, we'll have a few different options, but we're out here to program, so we'll choose programming in the top left. And the next screen asks us to verify the make, model, and year, so we'll re-input that. Scroll down to Toyota Corolla 2016, and we'll submit. And this next screen gives us a lot of important programming notes, and normally we would have an opportunity to read those before we get to this position. So for today, let's assume we've already done that, and let's skip past to the next screen and continue to our programming options. And on this screen, it gives us a few different categories for all the different types of keys and remotes that may be available for this vehicle. So we see transponder, we see remote, we see proximity. And since we are programming a proximity remote for a touch or a push to start vehicle, we will hit fob and proximity remote programming. And on this new screen, we have two options, one for remote and one for proximity. Like I said, we're programming a proximity remote, so we'll choose that option. And then it's going to load the programming steps, and this very first step tells us not to disconnect the OBD or USB cable until programming is complete. And in this case, we also need to turn the emergency lights on. So we'll do that, and then we'll hit continue. And this next screen, again, we have a few options, but we're trying to program a keyless, and that's the option number 1, so we'll choose that. And at this point, it is going to give us each step, step by step. So all we have to do is take our time, read it carefully, understand what we're about to do, and then proceed with the step. So this says, place a currently programmed keyless remote, right here, in front of the start button. Do not press and wait for the vehicle to beep one time. I don't know if you heard it, it's very faint, but it did beep, so we can hit continue. And on the next screen, we have our next step. Place your new keyless remote in front of the start button and wait for the vehicle to beep 2 times. So instead of once, it will beep twice. And again, very faint, but it beeped twice, so we can hit continue now. It'll configure, and then programming successful. And that's all there is to it. So we can hit complete, we'll back out of our menu, and then it's going to ask us if we're done programming. So we'll say yes, and we'll give it 5 stars because it was quick and easy. And though every vehicle is a little different, most of them will just be a few steps, just like this one. And as you can see, now our new remote works, so our customer is ready to go on their way with their new key or new remote. So that's it, everybody. Programming a 2016 Toyota Corolla. I hope you learned something and enjoyed yourself. And of course, best of luck in your programming endeavors.
Okay, so there's programming with the smart box. You want to plug the smart box into the OBD port, or onboard diagnostics port. You may be more familiar with this than you realize. If you've ever had to plug in a device to check a check engine light code, or if you're in a state with emissions tests when they open your door and they plug in a device down by your steering wheel pedals area, that's what they're plugging into. It's the OBD port. And when you plug into it, as long as you follow the rule of 3, programming for you should look like it just did for me. Very quick, very easy, but we're all human. We all make mistakes, and you may make a mistake when it's time to program. That's okay. You're not going to hurt anything. The smart box isn't designed in a way that it goes in and changes anything in the vehicle. That's not what it's doing. The vehicle has its own built-in system for accepting new keys or remotes, and the smart box is there just to talk to the vehicle and then translate that into instructions that you can follow. And if you follow them correctly, you'll program the key or remote correctly. If you follow them incorrectly, it won't program at all. That's all that happens. It just doesn't work. So if that happens, all you have to do is go back to a previous step. It may be the first step, it may be a later step, but you're going to go back and you're going to try it again. So there's no penalty other than the time it takes to give it another shot. So don't be afraid of it. You're not going to hurt anything. You just may have to take a second or third stab at it. And if that happens, that just means you might want to slow down, read the steps a bit more carefully, see what you might have missed or misinterpreted, and that will definitely help. And then here's the thing, that programming there is only about a 30-second programming. It took 3 minutes because I was taking my time and teaching you and showing you everything. But if you're just following it in your own head and you're doing it at your own pace, it's going to be much, much quicker. So even if it takes you 2 or 3 tries, most vehicles will still get you out of the vehicle within a few minutes. So don't be afraid of it. But if it does take you more than a handful of tries, or maybe the widget said it was supposed to be a 5-minute programming and you've been out there for 10 whole minutes, that's a pretty good indication that things may not be going so well. It's not the end of the world, and I don't expect many, if any of you, to end up in that situation. But if you do, all you have to do is flip the smart box over. There's the number for tech support right there on the bottom. You can give them a call. They're open 7 days a week, and they're very good at what they do. And it's pretty rare that somebody calls up with a problem that they haven't already solved at least once that week. So they are very knowledgeable about these devices and these programming procedures and these vehicles. They know what kind of questions to ask. They know what kinds of things to look for. So if things aren't going well, give them a call. They're going to help you out. You're going to get on with your day. Your customer's going to go home happy, and that's the way it should be. So again, I don't expect anybody to run into those kinds of problems, but everyone's biggest fear is what happens when things don't go well. Well, nothing really. You just call tech support and they help things go well in that case. So don't worry about it. You should do fine as long as you follow the rule of 3 and read the instructions carefully, but tech support's there in case of emergency. All right, so with that being said, we have one topic left, and that is the Condor Mini automated key cutter. Yes, we're going to cover high security key cutting, and the Condor Mini is the key cutter we provide. As the name implies, it is an automated machine, meaning it's going to do all the hard work for you, kind of like the smart box. And it does cut both standard and high security style keys, so it's sort of a one-stop shop for all key cutting. But I assume most of you know how to cut a standard cut key, and because the process for the two is almost identical, I know you're going to be able to cut a standard key with this machine once you see how to cut a high security key with this machine. So in the interest of saving time, I'm just going to show you the high security key example because that's what we're all here for anyway. That way you can see how to cut a key with this machine. And then of course, if you have any questions about this machine or want to get one for your store, if you don't have one, you can reach out to your rep and we can talk more about how to make that happen. So let's take a look. This is the Condor Mini automated key cutter, cutting a high security key. And when that's done, I'll be back here to wrap up this training. I'll see you guys in a few minutes.
Turn on the Condor Mini by twisting the red knob on the left side of the machine. Once it's powered up, we want to choose our cutting method on the right side of the main menu. There's a few different options here, but we want to choose cut by bitting every single time. This is the only option that will give us the ability to enter the SKU. Since we'll always have the correct SKU for the key, we know we'll always get the correct key cut from the machine. Choose cut by bitting and then enter in the SKU of the key you're going to cut. In this example, we're choosing an HON 017 key. On this screen, we can see what jaw to use and how to align the key inside of that jaw. In this case, we want to use the M2A jaw, or the M2 jaw, side A, and we want to align the tip of the key with the line that the yellow arrow is pointing to. So here's our M2 jaw, and we're on side A. Now we just need to put the customer's original key inside of the jaw and make sure that we're lining it up with the line that is on top, just like the picture showed us. Now we just slide the jaw into the machine, making sure to tighten down the locking mechanism. And then we want to choose Key Decode from the right side of the main menu so that the machine can decode the key cuts it needs to make. On this screen where it asks how much wear is on the key, just leave the settings as they are. If you have a particularly worn down key that's giving you difficulty, tech support will let you know when and how to use these settings if necessary. Hit confirm, and the Condor Mini will do a brief self-check before decoding the key. Now we just need to swap out the customer's original key for the new key to be cut. But before we do that, now's a good time to double check what the machine read off the key by holding up the original to the cut pattern we see on the screen. If you're satisfied, put the new key into the jaw, remembering to align it just like last time, and then we'll put that jaw back into the machine and we'll close the lid. Now hit the cut button and the machine will do another brief check, making sure that everything was inserted correctly before beginning to cut. Once the machine is done cutting, the first thing you want to do is brush off the key and the jaw so that none of those loose metal shavings interfere with the next cut. Then remove the jaw, flip the key over, and put the jaw back into the machine, closing the lid, ready to cut the second side. And remember, the Condor Mini can cut all styles of high security keys. Once the machine's done cutting the second side, again you want to brush off the key and the jaw, and then remove the key and do a quick visual inspection to make sure that the new key cut matches the original. If you're satisfied, just make sure to brush off the new key with a wire brush or a wire wheel in case there's any stray burrs still attached. And now your new key is ready to go.
All right, there it is, cutting a high security key with the Condor Mini automated key cutter. Remember, you want to choose cut by bidding from the main menu. That's going to give you the option to enter in a SKU, and then of course you'll be able to decode and cut the key like I just showed you. And that's it, guys. That is it for the training. We've covered it all. We've covered the different types of keys and remotes. We went over the website and the rule of three, showed you how to use the smart box from programming to chip reading to frequency testing, and now we can even cut high security keys with our fancy key cutter. So it sounds like you're ready to go. Again, this is not a replacement for the full training or live training. So if you haven't already gotten that training, I highly recommend you sign up for that in the near future or talk to your rep about some other training alternatives. But hopefully you got what you came for here. I should have provided enough information for you to feel confident and comfortable, especially if you've already been trained or if you were just looking for a leg up in one of your upcoming trainings. I think we accomplished that here. Of course, if you do have any questions or you need any support or help, you can always reach out to customer service or tech support. Again, the number's on the bottom of the smart box, or you can find that number and emails associated with those support places on the support page of the My Key Counter website. So make sure to check that out. Speaking of the My Key Counter website, there's an FAQ section there full of different videos and written topics, all kinds of answers to questions and common widget notes. You're going to encounter more information on the hardware that may have come with some of your key cutters or programmers, anything like that. So make sure you check out the FAQ if you got a specific question or want more information. And of course, we're always doing these trainings like this that are live with actual interaction and me being able to respond to you in real time and all kinds of fun stuff. I step over my lines, I make mistakes. It's a lot more fun than just watching this video. So if you're interested in that, head to training.mykeycounter.com. Register for an account if you haven't yet. You can do that straight from the My Key Counter website, as a matter of fact. Just log into your account, and you probably have already if you're watching this. But if you haven't, log into your account, hit that big banner that says live training available, register for an account, choose a time that works for you. And if you already have an account, you won't have to register one again. Just log in, and you can choose a time from the main page coming forward. So if you already signed up, but you didn't pick a time that you want, you can do that any time of the week. You can always sign up for more trainings down the road as well. Just log into the website, choose a time from the drop down, and you'll be able to sign up for anything that works for your schedule. So that's it for this training. Again, pre-recorded. It's a bit abridged. We didn't quite get into quite as much detail as we might with a full training, but again, I think all the core information is there. So hopefully you feel re-energized with your information, or at the very least, confident in what you're about to go learn and apply here in the near future. So thank you all for your time and attention, and of course, good luck on all of your key cutting and programming endeavors in the near future. And for the My Key Counter program, my name is Tyler. Thanks for watching.